Hello and welcome to this special episode of Talking Bollocks. It is, in fact, the 10th anniversary, and I'll have done an intro here, so you know that my good friend, old head Stephen Ivy, is here with me. And rather than do what I kind of considered doing, which was clips from a load of my favorite interviews and stuff like that, it's I don't know. I think that's a bit passé. I don't want to slag it off too much. It's something I might still do, but I wanted to do something different. And rather than me bang on about my podcast, I thought it would make more sense to get somebody who is a subscriber and has been for a long time, um, to ask me some questions and just have a chat because I'm sure there's somebody out there would ask some questions that this man may well ask. So yeah, this is it. 10 years. I cannot believe it. I really can't. In fact, I'm going to preface this with the fact that I went to see Censor a few weeks ago, and when I was interviewing Haytham, he said, our first album is 10 years old next year. And I was thinking, well, hang on. When I interviewed him, they were just bringing out an anniversary edition of Stacked Up, the 20th anniversary. I thought that was their first album. And this is all going through my head at the time, thinking, I thought that was their first album, but there must be one before it. And then when I watched the gig, it was great. And on my way home, I was looking for the Censor episode, and it's 9 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what? I interviewed Censor and Revocation at the Forum. I interviewed them in the same night, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And the fact this podcast is 10 years old, yeah, it absolutely does my head in. And it's led to many a cool thing, such as um, having a friend all the way over there in Texas.
I mean, yeah,
Hi.
yeah, yeah. It's don't come visit here. It's not very nice. We'll go to other parts of the country that are better. Anyway, so yeah, this is cool because I where I'm starting with this is actually something that I've always kind of not known and wanted to know about your life in a certain period of time. Because according to this, like the first episode was January 11th. That's what it says of 2014.
Yeah.
So, um, and prior to that, you had been doing stand up comedy, but I was always curious, um, what actually led to starting the podcast because during that time period, were you still dipping your toe musically in things, or were you focusing on comedy and something led you to the idea of a music related podcast? Or, like, what do you remember what specifically sort of led you in that direction?
That is a really good question because the answer is honestly, I don't know. Um, I was doing, you're right, I was doing stand up. I had I mean, when this podcast came out, I was probably still thinking, when this first came out, I was probably still thinking that um there may be a possibility that Acid Rain may reform, but that was certainly not, the reboot was nowhere in my mind. And honestly, when I first, when that the first interview is with, Zentrix and
Reanimator.
Reanimator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at that stage, it was, there was talk of us potentially reforming. But basically, Ramsey had just dropped the bomb before Christmas that he was no longer interested in doing it.
Okay.
And so when this podcast started, the whole thing was completely up in the air. Um, and I think honestly, now I think about it, I think I started the podcast because I'd been listening to podcasts for years.
Yeah.
So I knew what I liked about other podcasts and what I liked about podcasts in general. And that is the feeling of, um, especially with the interviews and things like that, is listening to something where you feel like you're listening into a conversation that well, you feels like you're eavesdropping basically.
Yeah.
And that, the long form nature of it really appealed to me, because the first episodes, if you go back in, the first, quite a lot of the first episodes are like, 2 and 3 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot there. And funnily enough, people used to say, "Oh, fucking hell, well, why did it? When am I going to have 3 hours spare?" I'm like, dude, it's a podcast. It's not a movie.
Yeah.
Just listen to fucking 20 minutes when you can, and just progress through it like that. Um, and eventually, I split it into the way it is now, which is 2 a month. But I think it was basically I wanted to do a podcast, and the only thing I was passionate enough about was music. I didn't want to do it, despite the fact I was, you know, deep into my stand-up career. Um, I wasn't passionate enough to do well. I don't know. It was more like I'm doing comedy and I'm right in it, so I don't want to do more comedy.
Yeah.
And it was something, a way of doing a podcast about something that I'm absolutely obsessive and passionate about,
Yeah.
which is music. And I am about comedy, but I was doing comedy and I wasn't doing music. So I think it was a way of kind of, sort of staying in touch with it.
Yeah. And plus, when I think back to like the first podcasts I ever started listening to back in the early 2000s, they were all essentially comedy. So you had, like Ricky Gervais, Kevin Smith, people like that. They were so for a while there, it seemed like a rarity to find a music related podcast. Now they're everywhere, but so that makes sense too. So I'm assuming that you're starting off with Reanimator and Zentrix. It's an easy in because you know those guys, your friends.
And it was at a gig that I was going to.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was doing a guest spot with Reanimator. So it made sense to bring my laptop with me and record a podcast. Um, Actually, do you know what? I've absolutely, totally forgotten exactly why the podcast started.
Oh shit. Okay.
I was driving back from up north, and I kind of become friends with Craig Hogan of All About the Rock, who get tons of mentions in about the first 5 years of the podcast,
Hmm.
because they hosted it, and it was on the All About the Rock website, and it was all, and basically I was chatting to Craig one time, and I think, and I was driving back to London. I was chatting to him because I wrote the odd article for him and stuff, and we'd become friends, and and we still are today, by the way. And I I think I remember saying to him, "Have you ever thought of doing a podcast, having a podcast up on All About the Rock?" And he said, "Well, yeah, but I hate the sound of my own voice, so you know that pretty much puts the end on it." And I said, "Well, I'd do it. I could do it." And he snapped my hand off and went, "Really? That'd be fucking brilliant if we did." And I was like, "Yeah, cool. Okay." And Talking Bollocks was born, which was initially the logo is an All About the Rock podcast. So I've absolutely, completely forgotten all of that, and it's just come back to me now. I'm sorry, Craig. It's now 10 years later. Time to admit that I completely manipulated you. I wanted to do a podcast, suggested that you should do one. Um, uh, Pretty much thinking that you'd have done one by now if you wanted one. You said you didn't want to do one, so I suggested I would. And there you go. So that was genuinely it. So my apologies. That totally. I've gone back and answered question one again.
That's all right. That's all right. So it kind of leads me where I'm going though, because it's like when that idea was planted, because obviously now you're hooked up with PR, companies that send you stuff and send you ideas and albums or whatever. But in the beginning, did you have an idea of like, well, I know these people, this is where I'm going to go first? Or did you have any kind of plan of how you were going to start getting people to get on the podcast? Or did Craig have a hand in that?
Well, Craig had a hand in it because of the All About the Rock website,
Uh-huh.
but also, Nige Rocket appears early on. There's a few UK thrash celebrities that I knew I could reach out to, but also my good friend Chris Davies, who um, runs the kind of a lot of the back office for Overkill. Um, was I knew he'd help me out where he could,
Yeah,
and
because you
again,
had you had Bobby on really early.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
Bobby and Nige, I think they were, and um, yeah, Bobby is probably the person who's it may have been on the podcast the most over the years.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean he's such a cool guy, and it's been great fun to chat to, and been so supportive as well over the years. Um, so early doors, I was able to get some significant names, and funnily enough, I was flicking through the podcasts the other day,
Yeah.
and really early doors, and I think when I kind of felt myself really hitting my straps, and I think for me, the very first interview that kind of changed everything was Chad Gray, who was in Mudvayne at the time. Sorry, at Mudvayne at the time, was in Hell Yeah at the time. Vinnie Paul, by the way, was sat about 8 feet away across the other side of the hotel lobby
Hmm.
during the whole interview. Um, and It was the first time that I had an interview with somebody that was proper long form,
Yeah.
and um, that I was able to engage with on a level other than music, and somebody that was just happy to talk about anything. And I'd been told under no circumstances to bring up Mudvayne. And the guitarist from Mudvayne was initially in Hell Yeah. And
Hmm.
at the time of the interview, he had only recently left within weeks. So it was hard and fast laid down to not talk about him.
Yeah.
And and we I mean think we spoke for about an hour, and about 45 minutes in, I it was like it conversationally came to a point where I couldn't it just felt natural to just say, and of course, you've just had to split with somebody you've been working with nearly all your musical life. And I remember Chad Gray, clear as day, just going, "Yeah, man, yeah, I don't want to talk about it." I was like, "That's cool." And then he proceeded to spend 10 minutes talking about it. Um, and I had to be. And at this point, I'm thinking I have to be really sensitive here
Yeah.
because I've been told that this is a place not to go to, and we've ended up here. And I haven't manipulated the conversation. It was just two guys talking, and it came
Yeah.
up. Um, and and then we carried on talking, and I didn't pry. I didn't I didn't uh pry in any way into um what had happened or anything like that. I just let him talk, um and as soon as he'd finished talking, um I mean I might have asked a little bit more, but I just didn't want to pry too much because he clearly said he didn't want to talk about it. It was clearly genuinely upsetting for him. And so I was just sensitive to it. And then the conversation drifted off to something else. And there and we finished the conversation, finished recording, and then we ended up talking about Bill Burr and stand-up comedy and all, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I saw him recently." I was like, "Oh, fucking hell, really?" And it was awesome. It was really, really cool. Um, and funnily enough, many, many years later, when I did the Motorcast interview with Jason Newsted offline, we ended up talking about Bill Burr and Jason talking about how he was, he's actually kind of friends with him, and it was really cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, the other thing about the Chad Gray episode was the interview was supposed to be half an hour, and PR came over and started giving it the wind up signal like this. And it's in the interview that Chad just goes, go away. I'm really enjoying this. So,
I mean,
and just like that, and the fact that he talked about the Mudvayne thing,
yeah.
and then we talked about comedy, and then I left, and I just remember walking away. I was like, wow, this is a buzz. This is a buzz from just doing an interview. Now, normally I'm the one being interviewed,
Yeah.
back then, and I got a buzz from interviewing somebody and from that whole experience, and it left a mark on me where I think that was the first time where I realized that maybe I could do this interviewing thing, because I know I can talk, but can I listen? And that that really, I think that really kind of encouraged me to go, yeah, maybe, this is the route to go down. It's, to try and get as people just have that conversation. The first chat with Bobby is kind of question answer, but we just have a chat. It's two guys, but this was different. This was like, yeah, it was a connection, and they're still my favorite interviews to do to this very day. Are the ones where people say things you're not expecting. You end up talking about stuff that it's got nothing to do with music or bands or anything, just where you make a connection with somebody. Um, and that was one that was really early doors that I just thought, yeah, that's really cool, and I got a real buzz from it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And that I've never. I'm still waiting to get to that point in doing my interviews where I finally get that thing where somebody says, "Don't talk about this." I'm just like, oh, that's. I think that's when you know you finally hit on something good.
Well,
It's a
yeah, I mean, the weird thing is, don't wait don't expect for it to come along, because I don't really think I've had anybody do that since.
yeah.
I brought something up and said, yeah, I don't want to talk about that, and then talk about it.
So that actually leads me to like it's kind of a general question or a number of things, whatever you think of. But so there's that thing of like, okay, maybe somebody doesn't want you to talk about something, but then there's the other side of the coin where I know you've had at least one interview I can think of that you've talked about where the person you interviewed only wanted to talk about one thing and wouldn't really budge from that, because I remember you talking about Dave Ellefson,
Yeah.
talking about his book, and that's
Yes.
kind of all he wanted to talk
Oh,
about.
yeah, all roads kept leading back to the book. And but there is somebody who was on a major label in the late 80s and early 90s, who
Yeah,
will have had media training by that major label, and basically learn how to keep, if you've got, you've got an interviewer who's wanting to talk to you about, your rock and roll past, or your crazy touring stories, and you just maneuver the conversation back to the new album, because you're basically trained like a politician is trained to stay on what you want to say, not what the interviewer is trying to get. um and it becomes a little bit of a battle then, and I realized quite early on that that is what it was going to be, so I just played the game, because it's like, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to get anywhere here, so why make it uncomfortable, why
yeah,
make it patently obvious that no matter what I ask, we're going to keep ending up at the book. So, and hey, if you want to come on here and sell your book, then that's absolutely fine. I've got somebody who was once in Megadeth, because he wasn't in Megadeth at the time, and he's not in Megadeth now. But I've got somebody from the Big Four on, so
Yeah.
fuck it.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if when he does interviews now it's like if you're talking to Dave Ellefson, don't ask about what happened on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you're going to get shut down pretty quickly and pretty hard.
Yeah, but so on that note though, I where I was kind of going with that was as an interviewer, and you've done so many at this point. Is there one or a couple in specifically where you felt like there was kind of too much of a wall put up where the conversation really was kind of uncomfortable and you couldn't really get a rhythm going? Was there anybody that just made it
Um,
a more of an unenjoyable experience?
that's a really good question, and honestly, um, no one really springs to mind. Um, to be honest, the interviews that stick in the mind are the ones that were that I felt after it finished. I either did a little dance of celebration in my flat on my own, or I hung up and went, "Wow, I wasn't expecting that." In the kind of sense that, whoa, that was like fucking not what I was expecting. That went deep or went long or went to places that I hadn't imagined ever going. Um, and I mean, the only the only thing I can think of that springs to mind along those lines is an interview I didn't get. And I don't think I've ever told this story on the podcast before. I think I've always kept it for Patreon. Um, and my apologies if I have told it on the podcast, but I don't think I have. So I was put in contact through a mutual friend with Billy Sheehan, the legendary bass player. And so I sent Billy an email and I said, "Hey, so and so, give me your details. Fancy coming to the podcast?" And I got a reply. Yeah, cool. Sounds great. Tell me where, tell me when. I was like, wow, this is going to be easy. So I messaged him back and I said, okay, well, what part of the states you in? Yeah, I need to know time zones, and what days work best for you. And, what's best is Skype, phone, because even actually ways and formats of doing interviews have changed over the last 10 years. With obviously we're doing this on Zoom. This didn't exist when I started the podcast. So anyway, I sent this email off, the basic information that I always send off to people. And what came back was uh, nothing. So I sent another email saying, "Hey, Billy, are you still up for doing this podcast?" And I got an email straight back going, "Yeah, cool, man. Yep, definitely up for it. Yep, cool. Just tell me where, tell me when." So I sent the same email back with the same basic information request and nothing. So then I sent another email saying, "Okay, this time, this day, I'd figured out where he lived, done the time zone, this time, this day, this format. How's that?" No reply. And I was just like, "Oh, for fuck's sake." And I think genuinely there was a few more, "Yeah, definitely. Tell me where, tell me when" emails in there. So eventually, like, I just, right, do this time. Right, okay, great. Sat down, nothing. He never turned up. Not a sign of him. And then the following day, I remember I was coming in into my front room. I just cooked a meal, sat down. I was just about to start eating, and my phone on my Skype started ringing on my phone, and it just said Billy Sheehan. And I just looked at it and I just went, "Oh, fuck off, Billy. I just fuck off. I've had enough. I've had
Yeah.
enough." Um, and I think I did send him an email after that going, "Hey, you may be on something here. Just like, just ring it up whenever you feel like it." So anyway, yeah, didn't happen. Didn't happen. And the other thing that I was thinking about when I was talking about this, I I emailed New Model Army and said, "Is there any chance that Justin Sullivan would be up for doing coming on my podcast?" I can't remember what I said, but fellow Yorkshireman, etc. And also Acid Rain's former bass player Ian Gangwer, who passed away in these last 10 years, within the last 10 years as well, which is very, very sad. There was a rumor that he'd auditioned as a bass player for New Model Army as well. So I sent an email off, and an email came back, and that it's like, would there be a chance of getting um, and the reply I'll always remember. I got the reply from New Model Army, and I was like, "Ooh!" Opened it up, possibly. Dot 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 dot, and I was like, "That's Justin. Yep, that's Justin. I've got the man himself." So I emailed back and I went, "Possibly sounds good. Could we possibly do it sometime? I don't know, possibly soon." And a couple of emails, and he rang me an hour early, and I was like, "Oh, Justin." He was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. We'd agreed 8 o'clock." And he was like, "Oh, did we? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Speak to you in an hour," and hung up. And I was going to say, like, "No problem. No problem." It's fucking Justin Sullivan from New Model Army ringing me up. He's
Mhm.
an hour early. Not a problem. But ever the professional, he rang back an hour later, and I was like, "All right, cool. Hi, how are you?" And he seemed quite guarded, and it sticks in my mind because, like, more guarded than as is normal. It's like, we know it's an interview, but I don't know. It just seemed he seemed mystified as to why I'd want to talk to him, and I was mystified by why he wouldn't think I'd want to talk to him.
Yeah.
And I ended up having an absolute blast. I mean, I really, really enjoyed doing that interview. There was also a landmark moment where Sepultura came up in the conversation, and he was like, I lost touch with those guys. I haven't spoken to them for years. And I ended up being able to say, "I've got Igor Cavaliera's phone number. Do you want me to give it to you when we finish doing this?" And he was like, "Yeah, great. That'd be cool." I was just like, in my head at the time, I was like, "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. You're reconnecting Igor Cavaliera with Justin Sullivan. This is mental."
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was weird because Justin can be quite a cool cat, and quite standoffish, but he seemed to I don't want to say warm to me because that sounds naff. He relaxed quite quickly, and it ended up being a favorite, a landmark, as was Igor Cavaliera. I remember we came up with the phrase, because he's lived in London so long. We came up with the phrase, he's a Britzillian now. He's not a Brazilian, he's a Britzillian.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that's but I no, I don't think I don't think I've ever had anyone where I've got off and gone, "Fuck me, that was hard work."
Yeah.
Well, actually, apart from Dave Lefson.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, I mean that's you made a good point that he's probably been told by somebody else, like, hey, here's what you're supposed to be doing for this
Yeah,
interview.
yeah, he's just media trained to
Yeah.
death.
Yeah. But that was mentioning Sepultura is a good segue too, because the other side of the coin is, out of all of the shit you've done. I mean, you've done a lot of interviews. New Model Army. Leading off onto that, like, was what would you say? You can even narrow it down to a couple if there's not just one in particular. Were the biggest gets, not just as they're a well-known name, but they're
To me,
a favorite of yours? Like, who's
I
been the
mean
big
that.
gets for you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these are easy.
Okay.
These are easy. Top of the tree, the man who's responsible for me being in music. Never mind. I mean, and everything comes from Marillion. Everything stems from Marillion, and specifically Fish.
Hmm.
Um, because not only did I fall in love with the music and the voice, but I fell in love with the lyrics. And Matt Denny, another guy at All About the Rock, he got the Fish interview, and I it was amazing. It's like he's like, I've got him, I've got him. I'm like, oh man, this is amazing, this is amazing. He's playing Islington, brilliant, wow, amazing. So I get to Islington Academy fairly early, and I'm outside, and I ring the contact number I've got, and he said, "Oh right, he's not here. He's back at the hotel. He's at the Islington Hilton. He's in the foyer. Um, you'll see him there. He's in the restaurant." I was like, "All right, okay, okay, cool." I said, "Look, how long have I how long have I got? Is there a few of us?" And he was like, "No, it's just you." At which point, I thought I might get 15 or 20 minutes of his time. At which
Hmm.
point, I'm thinking, right, okay, well, that's going to be like minimum half an hour, right? And and I was just like, right, okay, here we go. I think I rang Matt as well. I went to a restaurant and had something to eat, and I rang Matt and said, "It's just me. Oh my God, thank you for this." And I walked down and I walked into the foyer, and there he was in a restaurant. And I went over and said, "Hi, I'm Howard. I'm here to do the interview." He's like, "Oh, hello, sit down." I'm not going to do the accent. I can't. And he sat me down. And he said, I'm just going to have some soup. Do you want anything? Do you want to order anything? I was like, no, I'm good. Thanks. I'm fine. He's like, "Oh, okay, cool. No problem." Um, and his wife was there as well. And he said, like, fire away. So I just popped my phone down between the two of us. And I just had an awesome chat for about an hour. And he said something which I had never realized. And the fact that it was him, he was the reason that I do any of this. And he said to me during the course of the interview, "You see, the thing about me is I'm a writer who can sing. I'm not a singer who can write." And part of the interview was about the dread of losing your voice and the stress and the times it's happened to him. And like you have to pull gigs sometimes even after sound check.
Hmm.
And you know, he was coming towards the end of his career and just saying, I'm not going to miss that." And the fact that the band who was supporting him on that tour had to go home 3 dates early because the singer has lost his voice. And he said, "I was sat in the tour bus looking out and just looking at them stood on the pavement waiting for their stuff to be packed up and go off." And he said, my heart was bleeding for him. And and he and when he said that, "I'm a writer who can sing. I'm not a singer who can write." And I just went, wow, not only is it you're the reason that I'm doing this, but after all these years, you've just made sense of something that I think I knew, but I kind of didn't know.
Hmm.
And that was that yeah, I'm a writer who can sing. And I have those stresses about my voice, and and yeah, it was a real moment. And then it continued. And I hadn't planned any of this, but I realized that where we were sat, we were in Islington, and there used to be an Our Price Records, and my mate Will Smith, the comedian, the English Will Smith, the comedian, used to work there. And he was a huge Marillion fan. It was something we bonded over on the comedy circuit years ago. I even like met him down there and gave him a load of editions of the Web, the early Marillion fan club magazine. And he was like, "Oh, Will?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah." And he was like, "He's coming to the gig tomorrow night." I was like, "Oh, is he? I haven't seen him for years." And he goes, "Do you want to come? Do you want?" And like all of a sudden, Fish was just like, this was no longer an interview. This was excited man with the power to reunite two people who hadn't seen each other for about 10 years.
Yeah.
He's like, "I know him really well. He came to my wedding. He's coming tomorrow night. Are you coming tomorrow night?" I was like, "Well, I was going to come tonight, but Yeah, I'm free to come tomorrow night. Yeah, come along. I'll put you on the guest list. And so he did. And we went a lot, and I went along, and I met Will, and it was great. And we all went backstage afterwards and met up with Fish. And he was just stood there, like looking at us both like a proud father, like I did that. These two guys, and asked him what's going, what's the story here with me and Will. And he started to say, well, Howard was interviewing me yesterday, and it came up during the course of the interview. And he just looks at me and he goes, you tell the story, Howard. You'll do a better job than me. And like, at that point, I was just like, the greatest on stage raconteur I've ever seen has just passed the ball to me. And if I don't smash this into the goal, I'm
Yeah.
going to be disappointed in myself for the rest of my life. Because seeing Marillion live again, not only was it the lyrics and it was the singing and everything else, but then I saw Marillion live, and I realized that between songs could be entertaining as well, because Fish was just a great raconteur, loads of stories, and yeah, just a great guy reacting to. He's just a natural frontman, but it just stuck in my mind that when you went to see them, between the songs was entertaining as well. And how cool is that?
Mhm.
Instead of people just instead of just hearing the buzz of the audience and the band ignoring you and the singer introducing the song and then the next song comes on.
Yeah.
And so for him to say that, it was just amazing. And then at the end of the night, it was like, well, look, it's been great. It's lovely to meet you. Thanks for doing the interview yesterday and all the rest of it. And he gave me a hug. Now, Fish is a big man. He's like 6'5", I think. And as he hugged me, I just like this. If somebody had been like driving by, it would have just looked like a man, just like with a coat, and he was like slightly plump. The
Yeah.
slightly plump part was me. I just sort of disappeared into Fish as he gave me a hug and just said, and he just leant down and said in my ear, "It's lovely to meet you, Howard." And as you can tell, it stays with me to this very day.
Yeah.
Um, it was just, yeah, it was awesome. It was,
That there, you were froze for a second, but then you're back. Okay. I think that's a it's a really good example right there of because you people always use that phrase separating the art from the artist or whatever, but I always just think in so many cases the artist is just as important as the art, and sometimes you want that. So this is getting me to another question, kind of.
oh, well, hang on, because that's just Fish. Okay, that's
Yeah.
just Fish. There's
Yeah.
there's 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 other landmarks as well.
Oh
So
shit. Okay.
the other landmark, is Suzanne Vega.
Oh shit. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm interviewing Suzanne, and at the point where we've been knocking emails backwards and forwards. She's guested on the album and all sorts. And for those of you who don't know, she guested on Acid Rain's comeback album. We do a cover version of her song "Blood Makes Noise," which I sent to her. And one day I got a message saying, "Wow, this is great. I absolutely love it." And I was like, "Oh my god!" So eventually, the real end of all of that was me interviewing her for the podcast. And I'm
Mhm.
sat where I'm sat now and chatting to Suzanne on Zoom. Um, she's telling me what a great voice I have, and I'm just sat there going, "What? This is just fucking. This is insane. This is
Mhm.
ridiculous. Like this is my angel. She's this is fucking mental." And then on top of it, I say to her, "Oh, I spoke to Fish from Marillion recently, and he said he was a singer. He was a writer who could sing, not a singer who can write." And I kind of feel the same way. I'm interested to know what do you think you are? She said, "Oh, I'm definitely a writer who can sing." And do you want me to tell you about the time that me and Fish got drunk together? And I was like, "Oh, fucking hell. My brain is about to explode."
Mhm.
So that was an insane moment. Um, meeting Max for the first time. and him knowing who Acid Rain were, and me showing him that I had an Acid Rain t-shirt, and he was like, "Yeah, yeah, you guys, yeah, man, yeah, yeah, I remember you." And at the end of the interview, again, he gave me a hug, and he just said, "It's good to meet you, brother." And I was just like, man, he was
Yeah.
just totally just like on the level, really, really cool. Um, and I mean, that was a real moment.
Hmm.
There's been loads of people on the way. In lockdown, I haven't spoken to him since, but I did a series of interviews with the one and only Jimmy DeGrasso,
Hmm.
the legend, the legendary metal drummer.
Yeah.
We just hit it off. I even got him on Movie Bollocks, and about 5 minutes in, he was like, "Yeah, I don't really watch many movies." I was like, "Fucking hell, Jimmy, help me out here." And then we've been talking for about 45 minutes, and he just drops in that he's in fucking Wayne's World. And I'm like, "Dude, come on. Like, this is ridiculous." So I haven't interviewed him since, but yeah, in the
Hmm.
middle of lockdown, end up chatting to Jimmy DeGrasso, which was fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember interviewing Scott Ian, and I was on the train to get home to interview him, and it was like my train got delayed, and then it didn't stop at the station where I live, and it got to interviewing Scott Ian time. So I basically had a mobile that at the time, unlike most mobiles, you could actually record the conversation on the phone.
Hmm.
So I did. So um the station after my house, I got off there, not a station I ever get off at, because if I'm in that area, I'd like drive there. Um, so I just walked around. I just walked around the general, like outside, walking up the street. Um, I had to keep walking into a supermarket occasionally to get warm because it was February and I was fucking freezing.
Yeah.
And but so there I am, just wandering around interviewing Scott Ian, hoping to God that this fucking phone call is recording. I
Hmm.
wasn't hoping to God. I'm an atheist, but you know what I mean. So and just having the best chat with Scott Ian, and I knew the way in with Scott was to talk about his spoken word and me
Hmm.
being a stand-up. And then slowly introducing, remember Moshkinstein? Acid Rain? Yeah, that's me as well. Is it? Oh yeah, dude. Because Scott had me Maria Ferrero at Megaforce Records. He had her send me a copy of the MOD album, MOD for USA, before that record was even out.
Hmm.
I had a fucking copy of it. And it was sent to me with a note saying, "Scott from Anthrax wanted me to send you this. Can you send us a copy of the Moshkinstein demo? Scott would really like a copy of that." So we go way, way, way back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
then to be on the phone with him and doing all of that chat was just that was a moment that, like, I'll remember forever.
Yeah.
But and probably um the interview that means the most to me, and the one, other than Fish and Suzanne Vega, for completely different reasons. If anybody ever says to me, um who who what interview should I listen to, it will always be very early on in the history of the podcast. It's the interview with Frankie from Channel Zero,
Hmm.
because that is an interview that you are never ever going to hear repeated, and you're probably never going to hear an interview like that with anyone on any music podcast, because of the absolutely bizarre history there is behind it, which is a friend of mine called Tony Hermans, Toons Hermans, who I met when I played Ghent in Belgium with Acid Rain in 1988. And I saw him again in 1989. And in 1990, I received a letter from him that I opened, and it said, "Hi, Howard. I hope you're well. If you're reading this, you are one of the few people I have sent a letter to. Unfortunately, I I'm no longer alive.
Oh wow.
You've you've received this letter because I have killed myself. There is, and I remember the letter, and he he basically said that was there was no fun in his life anymore. Things he wanted to happen weren't happening. Things he didn't want to happen were happening, and he just didn't have the motivation or the capability to carry on living. And a second letter arrived a couple of days later, and it was the program from his funeral. And in the letter, he said, because I think Channel Zero at one of the gigs in 1988 when we played there, Channel Zero were the opening band, and then it was us, and then
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear Assault. And in his last ever letter to me, he said, "I hope you get to work with Channel Zero one day," because he sent me their demos as well, which were really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I hope you get to work with Channel Zero one day. Frankie is a really cool guy." And when I saw Channel Zero were doing press for an album, I said to the PR, "I'd love to interview Frankie from Channel Zero," and he was like, "Oh, great, thanks," because fucking nobody wants to interview him over it. And they're like fucking Metallica size in Belgium. They're absolutely massive. Put it this way: when we became friends on Facebook, I got messages from people I have friends who are Belgian, and they
Mm-hmm.
messaged me going, "Fuck me, you're friends with Frankie from Channel Zero." So I got to do the interview, and we had a bit of a chat, and then I explained to Tony Hermans, and he was like, "No," I said, "Toons Hermans," and he just went, you knew Tunes?" I was like, "Yeah." And Frankie was also received a similar letter to the letter I received.
Mm-hmm.
And I said in my letter, Frankie, it says, "I hope you and Frankie do something. I hope you get to work with them again one day. Frankie's a really cool guy." And I was like, "Well, I guess this is it, mate." And it was, yeah. I'm getting emotional talking about it and thinking about it. I've never listened back to that episode. Um, and maybe I will. Maybe I will now.
Yeah.
But it's it's not an interview that it's not an interview. It's two guys talking about somebody they never got to say goodbye to that they miss, and there's not a great deal of talk about music in there
Yeah.
because once that comes out, we both just kind of want to talk about him and just about life in general, and it's a real it was a real moment. And um and the other time, another interview I did that finished and I felt exhausted was the first time that I interviewed James Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
I had absolutely no idea where that was going to go.
Yeah.
And James talked all about the brain tumor that
Mm-hmm.
pretty much ruined his family, ruined his career. I mean, if you haven't listened to it, please do. I mean, the guy was living like a drug addict, living out of boxes, and had no friends, and everybody thought he was a drug addict, and all of it was an undiagnosed brain tumor. And it's a harrowing story,
Yeah.
and it just came out of nowhere. I didn't know any of that,
Mm-hmm.
and it was pretty incredible. It really was. And they are moments that that I think will stay with me forever. Um, yeah, yeah. So some really special moments in there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But and it's talking about a few of those, especially like Suzanne Vega and people like that. Like it leads me because like some of my the things I always want to ask you, they now they come from the aspect of I when I started doing Old Head, I really wasn't intending to do interviews. Because I didn't really think that I was like, who the fuck am I? I don't think that I could bring anything new to the table that these people haven't been asked, 500 times or whatever. But but it was like hearing a lot of your interviews and seeing other things that kind of made me go, well, maybe I'll just dip my toe into this and start doing it. And now I've done it. I don't know. I think I've done about 10 or so over the last year and a half or so. And I've gotten to interview people that are heroes of mine, all the way to people that I didn't even really know that well, but I was interested in their band. And it's been very fascinating. But the thing that makes me feel like I don't think I could ever be a professional interviewer, and this is like directed towards you, is that I find myself wanting them to like me,
Mm.
which is weird because like
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think for me it's different because sure I've been a musician for my entire life, but for the most part I've been small potatoes, and so what I've been mostly is a fan of music. So I talk to these people, and there's that part of me that goes, well, I want to give them a great interview because I want to be able to promote them because that's part of what we're doing here. But there's always that part in my brain where I'm just like, God damn it, I hope they like me and I hope we can be friends. Do you find yourself battling with that, or do you think you have a good way of compartmentalizing things like that when you are a fan, or you just legitimately like somebody?
Um, do you know what I have to do? Well, because I've been in the music business as long as I have, because I'm an as Mina Caputo put it, because yeah, I try, and at the beginning of all my interviews, I want them to know who's interviewing them. Oh,
Yeah,
so they've got a bit of a backstory on me. I know what it's like to just like have somebody just start interviewing you, and it's like, oh, I wonder who this is. I wonder why I'm talking to him.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but also, I want to get in there that singing a band, 20 years of stand up, band's back, and as Mina Caputo put it when I finished saying it, well, thank you for that, Howard. It's nice to know I'm talking to an artist, and I've got that advantage. I've got that advantage that um, straight away it becomes like a peer-to-peer interview. So that dynamic that you inverted commas suffer from isn't there. It's like it's one to another, and it puts the interviewee at rest. They go like, right, yeah, okay. And often you might hear in interviews, you'll hear somebody go, well, you know what I mean, you get it, you've done it. And that to them is like, that's a pass. That's like, I don't have to fucking describe what it's like to be on tour to
yeah,
somebody because this guy knows. So it's a shortcut to getting to places that maybe other people don't get to.
yeah,
Um, which is, and so to be honest, it's like, yeah, so that the dynamic isn't the same as yours. It's not really relevant. What I want to do is get a good interview. That's it.
yeah,
you know, what I want is for them to walk away from it and go, I enjoyed that. That was cool. I want them to go, I'd talk to that guy again.
yeah.
Because it's like everything I do, whether it's a stand-up gig, whether it's a gig with Acid Rain, whether it's an interview, you're doing two interviews, you're doing two gigs, you're doing two shows, you're doing this one. And if this goes well, it means you get the next one.
Mm,
That's always the mindset. You never know who's out there, you never know who's watching, you never know who's listening. And um, so I just want to do, I mean, I one that sticks in the mind, three that stick in the mind during lockdown was Derek Green, Jens Bogren, and Andreas Kisser, talking to them all about Quadra.
mm-hmm,
And of course, those interviews, I had them, and then I kind of went back to Andreas and went, look, I've done these three. It's all about Quadra. You're doing Sepulquatra. Should we hook up and you? And he was like, dude, great idea. Let me put you in touch with the people who are doing the back end on that, which I did. And so, during Sepulquatra, there was 3 weeks where there was Talking Bollocks interviews dropping, which
Mm,
was which was fucking great. It was a like absolute buzz for me. But
yeah.
I loved doing the Andreas interview. And like we did the interview, and some of my close friends have said to me, I don't want to, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but that's a fucking great interview. Um, and and Andreas, like at the end of the interview, I finished recording, and Andreas went, "That was really cool, man. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed doing that with you. Thank you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But but again, I know what it's like
Yeah.
to do an interview and come away from it going, that guy knows what he's talking about. That was cool. There were
Yeah.
some cool questions in there. Or they didn't ask any questions. We just had a chat. It's like I know how that feels to be on the end of it. Um, and with the recent announcements about Sepultura not being a thing anymore, it means even more.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's cool, and and like I said, that's why I want to get that in early to try and put them at ease. It makes me cringe sometimes even when I'm doing it, it makes me cringe because I feel like it sounds like I'm going me, and
Yeah.
people have come to this interview to hear about who I'm talking to, not me. But that's the reason I do it, in case you've ever wondered, people, and in case you ever think, Jesus, this guy can't get over himself. That's the reason it's there. That is
Yeah.
genuinely the reason it's there.
I mean, I've it's actually talking to you from that aspect where not just the interviewer, but you've been interviewed. That actually makes me feel better about that because I've always felt that way. I've always felt that somebody needs to know, like, if I'm a fan, what was the era that that brought me in, or if I am a songwriter, I am a musician. So yeah, I think that's and I always, like you said, feel weird. Like I don't want to make it all about me, but
But it's worth putting it in there
sure,
because
yeah,
and again, like I said, if you're in a band, you do a shitload of interviews with people if you've got no fucking idea who they are, why you're talking to them, what they do, whether
yeah,
they like your band or not, whether it's for a podcast, website, whatever. You might get a bit of info, you might not. And so when people take the time to do it, it's cool. In fact, that's the start of the interview with one of my favorite interviews this year. Well, I go ahead and say it, probably my favorite interview this year, probably the longest interview I've done ever, with Zoltan from Ectomorph.
mm,
That's coming down the pipe very soon, people. And right at the beginning, I do all of that, and he says, "Oh, thank you." Like, great, yeah. Like, I know who I'm talking to now. So yeah, I think it's a real thing. And you know what? Interviewing people who I've always wanted to interview, um, and anything like that, when the interview finishes and we say, "Oh, great, thanks a lot, bye, right," that it's then that I sit there and go, I've just sat on the phone with Igor Cavaliera for an hour,
yeah,
and that's when it kicks in. But at no time in the interview, I'm just in the moment. It's it's not Igor Cavaliera. It's this. It's a drummer that you really like. But and you want to know more about, and that's it.
yeah,
Because yeah, you just can't stray from the path. You people could tell. Um, and I've just remembered. I've just remembered. Um, some people that I do want to mention for specific reasons.
okay,
Um, and that's David from Soilwork, and also Malcolm Dome. Malcolm was a regular guest on the podcast before he
mm,
died. Dave from Soilwork, I only got to interview him once, but he left a real mark on me. Dr. Dave, we had a right laugh.
mm,
Both are no longer with us. Um, And of course, I'm blanking on the name, and I was hoping it was going to come because it feels like it's disrespectful. But Reed St. Mullen,
Oh,
Corrosion of Conformity drummer,
yeah.
who was the only member of the band who was willing to take time out of his day to interview me. I'd been told to go down there and somebody would come and chat to me. And Reed came down and he was really cool. And all three have passed. Malcolm I was somebody I was very close to.
Hmm.
If I emailed Malcolm and said, "Do you want to come on the podcast?" I'd get a reply within 5 minutes going, "Great. When?
Yeah.
Where are we doing it?" In later years, we met at his private members club on Dean Street. This is the guy that, and also in his last ever albums of the year list. Um, I'm not sure it was, but his albums of the year list in 2019, number 19 of his top 20 was Acid Rain, The Age of Entitlement, which,
It's too
you
low.
know, well, maybe you might have a point there. Um, but this is the guy that invented the term thrash metal.
Hmm.
And we were the only thrash metal album in his top 20 that year.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think it was because it deserved it as opposed to he knew me. But do you know what? Whenever, when I sat down and talked to him off mic, he said, by the way, what a great album. Really well done. You guys have never sounded better. In fact, you've never sounded that good, if I'm honest. And he was effusive with his praise, which meant the world to me.
Hmm.
And I was watching a documentary on AC/DC Back in Black on Amazon last night, and who appears but my good friend Malcolm.
Hmm.
And I miss him. I do miss him. Um, but yeah, there's three people I'll never interview again.
Yeah.
And it was just worth mentioning them all because they were all great people.
Absolutely. I'll lead us out of here with maybe it's. I mean, we've touched on a lot of important things, but maybe the future is the way to wrap it up. Um, so it's like almost like a this is a two-parter, and one I guess one you might have to think more about. I don't know, but so you've done tons of interviews. The easy question is, what are the one or two like you would hope before you stopped doing this you would get to talk to these people? And the second part of that question is, you've been doing it for 10 years. Do you ever see yourself getting to a point where you've kind of done everything you've wanted to do, you've talked to everyone you wanted to talk to, and maybe you'll be
Yeah,
could you ever reach
yeah.
a point where you go, all right, I've talked to all the people I really want to talk to, I'm kind of done with this? Do you think that could ever actually happen?
Valid question.
Mm-hmm.
Valid question. Um, one of the people that I would really love to interview, um, his people. I emailed his people, and his people emailed me back and said he's not doing interviews right now, but hit us back late January, early February, and we'll set something up. That's through a connect of a connect, and so I'm very much looking forward to chatting to this guy.
We don't get to
Um,
know who it is.
oh no,
Not before it
oh no,
happens.
well, exactly,
It's
exactly.
Chad
That's
Kroger
a
from
that's
Nickelback.
yeah, that's a fool's errand. The minute you say shit like that, it never happens. The
Yeah.
golden rule, you never say it until it's already done.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I hear that.
but but so there's this dude. I'll tell you offline who it is.
Okay.
Um, do you know what? The one person that I would want to interview has got fucking nothing to do with music.
Okay.
And so I would never get them on my podcast, and they don't do interviews. And it will make no sense to you. You will not even know this name.
Oh,
But
okay. All right.
anybody listening who understands UK football,
Oh,
it would be Marcelo Bielsa, former Leeds United manager and utter fucking legend. Fascinating, fascinating individual. And one of the reasons I'd love to interview him is he doesn't do interviews. Can you imagine how fucking difficult that would be?
Yeah.
um, but musically, um, I funnily enough, I'd love to interview Lars. Lars is a great interview, and we've
Hmm.
met before. And I know Lars is as engaged. It's like I know straight away that if I was doing an interview with Lars, straight away he'd be like, "Yep, Acid Rain.
Oh
Know who you
yeah,
guys are.
the
I know who
dude,
you guys are." And
his.
we've got so many people in common. I would
Mhm.
drop names that he's known for fucking years. And also I'd remind him of when I met him in Shades, when we met backstage in Donington, and I know he would wormhole. We would not end up talking about stuff to do with Metallica. We'd
Yeah,
probably just
yeah.
go off and talk about fucking metal from the 80s. So I think Lars would be a fucking great interview. I'd love to get Lars on.
That's actually my number one. If I ever get interview Lars, I've done all the interviews I need to do. So
Yeah,
who knows? Maybe one day.
but other than that, oh, actually, do you know what? You know, when you said anybody difficult. This is going to surprise you. I've just remembered. Okay,
Hmm.
I know I've gone off on a tangent, right? And
That's all
no, I
right.
don't. And no, I don't see a day where this would ever stop because it has given me so much. And thanks
Hmm.
for leading on to that because this is what the podcast has given me. Okay, other than the things I've already mentioned, which are amazing. Um, Bobby Blitz, what a dude. Marcos Agueda from Death Angel. I got to chat to him after all those years of not, and now we're buddies. We see each other whenever he's in the UK. It's great fun. Love him. Scott
Hmm.
Holderby from Mordred. Corey Clark from Warrior
For your
Soul,
soul. Yeah.
interviewing him whilst he was making cocktails. He was sober when the interview started. He was pissed out of his head by the time it ended. It's utter chaos of an interview, but I fucking loved it.
Yeah.
Tommy Victor of Prong, who I've interviewed at either end of the career of the length of time of Talking Bollocks.
Hmm.
My old mate Sneepy, getting him on, and the crazy tales he tells me about behind the scenes that I can never put on the podcast. The guys in Billy Talent, who are my friends, who all signed a birthday card for my mum, who put my mum on the guest list, who had my mum in their dressing room, all chatting to her and made her feel like $1 million.
Hmm.
Um, Zetro from Exodus, catching up with him again. Not interviewing Billy Sheehan, getting getting Gene. Hey, dude, hey, H, I'll come on your podcast, no problem. Got to do the voice. It's Gene fucking Hoglan.
Hmm.
Michael Gilbert from Flotsam and Jetsam, who was watching a side stage when we supported them, and I grabbed him and threw him into the fucking crowd off the stage. And as he always says, I fucked that kid up as well that I landed on. Eric AK from Flotsams, one of the greatest voices in thrash metal I've always wanted to meet. I didn't just get to meet him; I got to fucking chat to him on the phone. It was awesome. No,
Hmm.
I got to chat to him just leaning against a wall. Craig and Lum from Heathen, who was just so much fun. Justin Sullivan, who I mentioned earlier. Harley Flanagan, absolute ledge. Got to interview him for the Motorcast. He agreed to come on Talking Bollocks. He's an absolute fucking top man, top dude. Craig Lucero, interviewed him early doors for Talking Bollocks, and interviewed him again recently, and that was so cool. With Forbidden
Hmm.
coming back, and I'm going to get to chat to him again. Interviewing Max and Igor, him and his son together, that was fucking legendary. And
Hmm.
obviously interviewing his brother Igor as well. Um, Having DX Ferris as a friend, having the fucking legendary Godless as a friend, doing live bollocks with Godless,
Hmm.
going on a fucking road trip to see the Beyond with Godless. That was fucking amazing. Hooking up with Neil Cooper again, who used to be in the Beyond and has been in therapy for years. Then finding out before the interview even starts that the bass player of therapy wants to know if it's okay if he can come and meet me because he's a huge Acid Rain fan. OTEP. How the hell How the hell do me and OTEP end up hitting it off like there's no tomorrow? I
Hmm.
mean, like, she's not doing any interviews with anybody when she comes to the UK, but she'll sit down with me for an hour to have a chat. That's
Hmm.
insane.
Yeah.
Doing a Slayer special with all of those journalists, and just that was insane. Des Fafara, who was just a beautiful guy driving around in his car with his wife, and his wife chipping into the interview as well, and she's no longer with us, and that makes me incredibly sad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was really sad to hear about that. But on the upside of that, hey everybody, Cancer Dan. I mean, Dan James had him on the podcast while he was recovering from cancer for the third time in his fucking late 20s. How unfair is that?
Mm-hmm.
Movie bollocks being a thing, old bollocks being a thing, you and me
Yeah.
being friends, me
Mm-hmm.
and Paul Waller now doing podcasts together. We're genuinely fucking very good friends. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Mark DeVito, I got to meet Mark. He's a friend. Miles Hackett, not only did me and Miles mate, not only did he mate, not only did we mate, no, we've never mated, but he is my mate, right? Let's get that fucking clear. He put fucking Planet of the Damned out as on vinyl when Acid Rain came back. He now works at BMG. We do an interview in the lockdown, come up with the idea of the motorcast. Fuck me, I've been doing the motorcast for years and I've met some incredible people,
Mm-hmm.
including Pascal Daviat, Lemmy's bootmaker forever, and a proper friend, a real life friend, Dave Ingram from Benediction, um, Bill Steer from Carcass, and Knox Colby, who's an absolute top dude. Kelly Schaefer from Atheist, Chris
Mm-hmm.
Kontos. How do Chris and I, great friends, and I know we're friends. You know why? Because we sat down at Bloodstock and chatted for about an hour, and it had nothing to do with music.
Mm-hmm.
Brian Slagle, what a legend! I got to interview him a few times as well. John Bush, I got to talk vocals with John Bush. He gave me some tips. How cool
Mm-hmm.
is that? I mean, all of this shit and everybody and everything I've forgotten. Um, that is just what like sprang to mind off the top of my head and isn't written down as note forms at all. Um, I'd love to get Corey Taylor on the podcast. I think me and Corey would hit it off really well. I'd love to ask him loads of questions nobody else has and have him not answer them, but I think that would be cool.
Yeah.
Um, but all of the things that have happened, all the people that I've met, the friends that I've gained from this podcast, and doing the Motorhead podcast, the Motorcast, which is, that is, if I wasn't doing Talking Bollocks, none of that would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been an incredible ride. So I just don't ever see a time where where I would stop. Um, but you know, eventually it will stop,
Sure.
because the same reason everything stops.
Yeah.
But
Not by
yeah,
choice though.
yeah, it's been an incredible ride. It really has, and I would never have dreamt any of this would happen. But you know what the biggest trip is out of all of this? There's a load of names I read out then, and some I didn't, who turned out were Acid Rain fans, and I had no fucking idea. I mean, I know I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that about um, Therapy's bass player. Sorry, mate, I've blanked on your name, but there are several people in several big bands that have like totally confessed to me that they were Acid Rain fans, and I had no idea. And luckily, none of them told me at the beginning of an interview or anything like that. Some
Yeah.
of them never told me at all. I had to fucking find out from other people because they hadn't dared mention it. I mean, how weird is that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like the most approachable guy ever. And it's like, what do you think I've been doing? Like, I honestly, it's been an absolute blast meeting some of my heroes, um, all of them being cool. Um, and um and finding out that some of these people whose music I've loved for years and I've got on a pedestal, and to find out that they've got me on a similar pedestal, that's fucking mad.
Mm-hmm.
That is just as mad as Jack McMad with a degree in mad from Mad University. It is just insane. So I'd be mad to stop doing this, wouldn't I?
Absolutely. I know. That's the bet, man. That was way beyond the answer I was hoping to get for that last question. That was a great wrap up right there.
It
Um,
pretty much was, wasn't it?
Yeah. And honestly, like that, it's great to talk to you about this, just because, like I said, like the path that I'm heading down with my stuff, it's a lot of like getting to know you and listening to your stuff and starting to feel more comfortable with like actually chatting with people. And whenever, people say that to me, it's like, oh, it's like we were just having a conversation. And in my head I always go, well, it's kind of like H does. I'm kind of just ripping off what he's doing. But
Oh, we're all sharing riffs. We're all, as Dime said,
yeah,
we're all ripping each other's style off. Everybody, the basically the best interviews you'll listen to are the conversational style ones.
yeah, I
You know,
agree, I agree.
and I like having no idea where it's going to go.
Yeah,
You know, because if I don't, they don't, and we're just gonna do some, and yeah, it's just about having a good chat. That's it.
yeah. And you know what, after all this time, I think this is the first time that I've ever actually legitimately interviewed you. you know
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
because
Right. It is,
we
isn't it?
Yeah, because I think in one of the early old bollocks, we talked about obnoxious, and I interviewed you a little bit about obnoxious. But this is it. So now I can add you to the list of people I've interviewed. So
Cool, man.
um,
Oh well, we've both got something out of this then, because
yeah,
I've managed to get away with not having to do a shitload of editing and getting all the best bits of interviews. And to be honest, I thought about doing that, and it just did my head in when I started thinking about it.
yeah.
And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So I
Well,
think this was a much better alternative.
I'm glad to have helped out. So
Cool.
yeah, I
Thanks,
know.
man.
How do we don't want to do the outro here? You
The
want to
out
do
well,
it?
the outro is that's 10 years, guys. And
Here's to the
10
next
more to
10.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely. Thanks to everybody for listening over the years, because as much as I've gone on about the interviewers and all the people I've met and the great experiences I've had, if you people out there listening to this right now, if it wasn't you guys listening, I wouldn't get any interviews, because they'd be like, nah, that guy's podcast shit. Nobody listens to it. So thanks for listening. Really do appreciate it. You're part of the team. Thank you very much.